quarter of a mile, slight right onto Causeway, A312.
There is clearly interest from the electorate to get a grip on climate issues. I think that the thing is, and this would be interesting to get more of this from the leadership candidates, is it's not just about the green levy, of course. There's other things government could
Take the next right onto Causeway, A312.
solar in wind farms, in nuclear, which was brought up, I think, by Thomas Willingham last night. But it doesn't necessarily have to specifically fall on the consumer and the government.
Continue on A312 for 1 mile.
Helen Thomas, CEO of Blend Money, an independent financial consultancy and former special advisor to George Osborne there. Now I want to get an expert perspective on the climate aspect of this, and we're joined by Mika Minio-Paluelo, who is Policy Officer for Industry and Climate at the TUC. Thank you for your time this evening. Are these heat waves that we're experiencing, and we're in the midst of one now, are they just going to continue to get worse year on year?
Yes, they'll clearly intensify each year, and that means, as you said, more people dying. Here, obviously, also there's heat waves in places like Bangladesh and North Africa and somewhere also it's high, and we know that we have to act on climate change because it's a reality in the present. But for those of us, I'm a mother, I'm sure everybody cares about future generations, we can't leave them a completely trashed climate. But at the same time, those heat waves are driving up our bills. Many of us might have fans running, there's a lot of ventilation running, but actually climate change is going to drive up bills unless we take action. At the same time, good climate policies can create hundreds of thousands of green jobs and clear a healthier environment, more nature, and lower bills at the same time. So it's not really a choice between the two. The correct policies would accelerate action on climate change, lead to a safe climate future, and reduce our bills.
I mean, both you and Helen Thomas, who's coming at it from an economic perspective, have quite clearly said there's a third way here. It's not a binary choice between bills and the environment. So do you think that this is almost an excuse to renege on some of the promises that were made under Boris Johnson's government about the environment?
It's both an excuse, it's also economically illiterate. Anybody who's focusing on green levies hasn't really looked at the scale. Green levies at the moment cost about £153 on an average bill. An average bill is £2,000. That's less than 10%. A large proportion of those bills is partly the burden of privatisation, the fact that there's rip-off profits being made by the networks, by the supply companies, and
In a quarter of a mile, at Wagoners roundabout, take the second exit onto the Parkway, A312.
climate action earlier, we'd be less dependent on Putin, whether in Europe or in the UK. We wouldn't be buying that gas. Our energy bills wouldn't be set by that gas price. If we'd had more whether it's renewables, or it's solar, wind or nuclear, then we'd have lower bills as a whole. And it would be much better for the climate.
It's been portrayed as though Boris Johnson was completely revolutionary on climate change and did so much that was potentially unpopular in some corners of the party and now needs to be rowed back from. But do you think even...
Exit the roundabout onto the Parkway. Continue on the Parkway for 1 mile.
I think the real challenge of the Johnson government was more delivery rather than promises. They set targets, but then, like for example, let's say retrofitting homes, insulating our homes, they had the Green Homes Grant, they made the commitments were nice, but then we didn't see the delivery. And actually, homes, it's a great example. Our homes and our workplaces were built for a different century, for a different climate. They weren't built for these extreme heat waves we're seeing, or for the cold and winter. Now, if they had delivered, we at the TUC called
what you're saying. It's a sticking plaster solution that might sound good and might play well with people who don't properly understand the issues, but it's not really going to make that much of
In a quarter of a mile, at Cranford Parkway interchange, take the second exit onto the M4 slip road to Heathrow Airport, M25.
But we're not shifting away from those fossil fuels that Putin can manipulate, and we have a privatized system where companies can make vast profits, which isn't the case in the rest of... Look, in France, energy bills in the spring went up 4%. Ours went up 54%. That's because public energy there is publicly owned, and the French government said, hey, EDF, how about you reduce your profits, make a bit less, and instead you bring people's bills down. That could be the case here too. Instead, actually, if you're listening to this and you're with EDF, then you're paying so that French bills can come down.
Mika Minio-Paluelo there with some real food for thought, I think, on this issue. And I don't know whether it's churlish to ask you to choose which is more important to you, the cost of living crisis or the climate crisis. They're clearly both emergencies. They're clearly both going to kill people in the near future as well. But my question to you is more about how do we parse this? And is this as binary an issue as the Channel 4 leaders debate last
Exit the roundabout onto the slip road.
Or do you think that this is a case of...
In a quarter of a mile, merge onto M4.
feel like they're prioritising the cost of living crisis, but actually they just don't want to deliver on climate change because that would annoy all the wrong people. What do you think is going on here? 0345 6060 973 is the number to call. You can text 84850, tweet at LBC. You're listening to Natasha Devon and the time is 7:16.
LBC. I'm Julius Caesar, an emperor, not a tradesperson. But if I was, I'd be on Checkatrade. 8 out of 10 homeowners surveyed would choose a tradesperson from Checkatrade over one that isn't. And they guarantee your work for a year. So apply today. Up to £1,000, T's and C's apply.
Booking a hotel can be a bit of a hassle. The fake reviews, the endless options, not to mention the fear of getting a bad deal. But with Premier Inn, you can cast all those worries aside because with us you know exactly what you're getting. Like great value family rooms at over 800 locations, plenty of parking and delicious food to please everyone, even the fussy ones. So you can family trip without any of the faff. Premier
keep right to stay on M4.
Worth 3 out of the 5 candidates right to say, do you know what? We're going to scrap the green levies. We need to rethink net zero. People's cost of living has to be the priority here. We've had some texts and tweets coming in on 84850 and at LBC. Richard texts and says, if the climate change activists...
Keep right to stay on M4.
...social consequences will make the 1930s Great Depression look like the loss coin. That is, I think, what
Continue on M4 for 2 miles.
candidates want you to believe, Richard. Listening to Mika from the TUC talk about how a green economy generates jobs and how if you do things like insulate homes, it saves a lot of money and ultimately makes the economy grow, I can't help but think that that is a narrative that we're being asked to buy into that doesn't necessarily reflect reality. Paul has texted low tax and low regulation to keep the donations coming in and jingoistic flag waving talk. Your text has disappeared from my screen. Jingoistic flag waving talk to keep the votes coming in. When has an energy bill ever gone down? So summarizing that text, Paul, you're saying that it's just words and won't ultimately help anyone. And Eric has texted and said the issue of climate action is not just at home, it's also about how we invest and fund fossil fuel industries across the world. The financial sector needs to adapt, and I don't think it will cost that much to change. Interesting. Well, over to your calls now, and Paul has called from Paisley. What would you like to say?
Good evening, Natasha. I don't think it's either with the Conservative Party. They're just telling people what they want to hear or what they want to believe so they can get voted in. It's all about keeping power with them. I mean, one of the things you've also heard is low tax and low regulation over and over again. Now, that's for the people that give them money, for the people that donate to the Conservative Party. And all the other culture war stuff, demonising people, you know, and we're patriotic about this, and that's just for the votes. That's just for the
In a quarter of a mile, keep right to stay on M4.
My best guess would be that somebody, or maybe a group of people who are major donors to the Tory party, have some money tied up in non-green energy.
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, look at the 5p, the Reggie Soon.
Keep right to stay on M4.
Fuel, petrol. Was that even reflected at the pump? No, it was just another bonus.
Continue on M4 for 4 miles.
You know, it didn't affect us in any way. It didn't cost, you know, pennies, and now it's way up to about £2 a litre. It's basically telling people what they want to hear and telling them what they want to believe rather than telling them the truth. And that is, they're only concerned about their own buttocks gracing those green seats. That's it. Nothing else in it for them.
And you know what? This actually brings us back to a conversation that we've had many times on this show about proportional representation, because every other country in Europe, bar Belarus, has proportional representation, and in pretty much all of those countries, a Green party of some description is part of a coalition government to ensure that the third way is represented and that people are properly informed about that.
Yeah, we've got it in Scotland with the Scottish Government, and, you know, we do have a fair battle, you know, of, you know, there wouldn't be Conservatives in the Scottish Government if it wasn't for PR. Yet they hate PR.
Well, yeah, Paul, that will explain why you appear to be so well informed on these issues. Thank you so much for kickstarting our conversation. Ian has called from Stratford. What would you like to say?
Well, clearly, you just reminded me, I do a podcast YouTube channel about dissecting political speech.
Right, okay.
And you just actually said there's some money going around for lobbying. One of the highest companies lobby, one of the highest ones are the energy companies. They lobby. There's a lot of money going around. They're scared. That's why you will hear that they do want to talk about it, because they're going to lose some donors.
And it is follow the money, and this might sound tinfoil hat, and yet Nadine Dorries herself, when interviewed recently before Boris Johnson kind of resigned, actually said with her own face and her own mouth, this will upset the donors, they do well to think about the donors, which made it very clear where their priorities lie.
Yeah. Sorry, I'm certain the carers are arrive any minute.
Okay, well, Ian, thank you so much for your call.
In 2 miles, at junction 6, take the A355 exit to Slough Central.
Asif has called from Greenwich. What would you like to say?
Well, what I'd like to say is that basically, you know, we kind of need to embrace these policies in terms of sort of being self-sustainable, because the bottom line is you know, the Tories will speech about how, we've just banned the green levy, etc., etc. The bottom line is that fossil fuels and everything else is running out, and we either pay now or we pay later. That is the bottom line. We either pay now or we pay later. We need to embrace these things. And the bottom line is that partly from the Labour government, but also from the Tory government, we've not had a coherent energy policy. David Cameron banned things like wind farms because, the areas were affecting his, the constituencies, and he had such a marginal sort of majority at that time. And we need coherent energy policies. We need to accept the other fact that we shouldn't be reliant on Russia or sort of countries even in the Middle East because of the uncertainty and how they hold us hostage to their human rights, etc., etc. We need to become self-sustainable. And actually, I think I didn't vote for Brexit, but one of the things I think that can come from Brexit is that we focus on this, saying, okay, let's become self-sustainable. Whatever, in so many different ways. And I kind of think that it's a mixture of things, and it's just been tragic that we've missed these opportunities before.
In half a mile, at junction 6, take the A355 exit to Slough Central.
Opportunities, brilliant idea. I'm not sure whether being part of the European Union would ever have prevented us from becoming self-sustaining in terms of energy, but it can certainly be packaged up and presented as a benefit of Brexit, and that would hopefully make people who
exit at junction 6.
But people who would be more reticent to act on climate change probably more likely to have voted Brexit. It's a way of getting them on board, isn't it?
In a quarter of a mile, at the roundabout, take the third exit onto Tons Lane A355.
And where our food comes from and how much environmental impact of all of that. That's what I'm also talking about, self-sustainability.
I see, yeah.
I don't know how much of a proportion of everything that is, and maybe it isn't that big a proportion, but these are all things that we're going to have to face, and we either face them now or we face them later at a crisis point. And I think in some ways with what's happened with the energy companies, it's we've had high bills for a very, very long time, and the companies have been accused of profiteering. What the government wasn't doing was they weren't saying to them, and I think it was the Labour government as well, wasn't saying, okay, if you want to make all these profits, you've got to invest them in some of those profits in sustainable sort of, whether it's wind power or etc., etc. They weren't making, they weren't forcing them to do it, and that's one of the situation.
Thank you, Asif, for that call, and what you said there kind of reminded me of what Kemi Badenoch.
Exit the roundabout onto Tons Lane.
In many ways, she was speaking to the dilemma that any politician is going to face.
In a quarter of a mile, slight left towards Sippenham Lane.
Talking about Lord Goldsmith warning that it would be political suicide to drop the 2050 net zero target that we have committed to, Kemi Badenoch said, I think he's wrong. The pledge was made in 2018 for 2050. None of us are going to be here as politicians in 2050. It's very easy to set a target you are not going to be responsible and accountable for when the time comes. And what she's talking about there is this tension between doing the right thing in the long term, but needing to be popular in order to retain your power as a politician in the short term. And people don't like change, and people don't like wind farms being...
Slight left towards Sippenham Lane.
I actually think wind farms are quite pretty, but a lot of people object to them, particularly in Tory constituencies.
Continue for 1.5 miles.
There's this old saying which is, society grows great when old men plant trees the shadow of which they will never sit in. I think that's the quote. So for me, I'm thinking it takes someone genuinely great to have the foresight to say, we will commit to this in 2050 when I may very well no longer be around, or certainly won't be part of the political happenings. However, what Kemi Badenoch's speaking to is, well, people are going to have to make sacrifices to bring that about in the short term, and it's me, as potential Prime Minister, who's going to have to deal with people's dissatisfaction at those sacrifices that they're going to have to make. Is this just about rhetoric? It was our first expert on the environment true when she said, do you know what? There's no tension here at all. When you have a green economy, that's a thriving economy. It creates jobs. If you're smart about this, if you invest wisely, no one actually has to lose anything. Or is there a real fundamental choice to be made between the cost of living crisis and the environmental or climate crisis? And if so, which takes precedent? How on earth do we pass this? The number to call if you want to get involved in the conversation is 0345 6060 973. You can also text 84850. Martin has texted and said, what climate crisis? I've seen no evidence of climate crisis, which is a extraordinarily Trumpian sentiment. I mean, maybe just don't research on the internet because there's all sorts of things on there, but go and find some peer-reviewed sources by 99% of reputable scientists in the world, and that will perhaps enlighten you. And of course you can tweet also at LBC. But it's time now for the news headlines with Tim Humphrey.
The government has held another emergency COBRA meeting to discuss next week's extreme heat warning. Forecasters predict it could hit 40 degrees in parts of England on Monday or Tuesday. A woman has died and a man has potentially life-altering injuries after a dog attacked them in South Yorkshire last night. 2 dogs have been taken from a property in Macefield Road in the village of West Melton in Rotherham. Wales have fallen short in their Rugby Union Series decider away to world champions South Africa. They were beaten by 30 points to 14. England have completed a series win over Australia, and Ireland created history by winning their first ever series against New Zealand. The weather, a fine evening for most and a clear night, cloudy in the north with a few showers and a low of 13.
This is LBC.
1977. Sweaty clubs, screaming singers, volume turned to full. I loved it. But maybe I went too often, because recently my hearing's not been so good. But now I'm back. Got sorted out Specsavers with their advanced hearing aids. Was like music to my ears.
To find out more or book a free hearing test, search Specsavers Hearing. While we can't stop the kids from demanding dessert for dinner, Tesco Club Card can give you the power to lower prices on family freezer favourites like Magnum Classic Ice Cream from £3.25 to £2.75 and Nestle Fab Strawberry Ice Lolly 6-pack from £2 to just £1.50. Helping you spend less with your Tesco Club Card or app.